US presidential candidates Donald Trump and Joe Biden hold their second and final debate before voters head to the polls on November 3rd. The debate takes place Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time in the US and runs for approximately 90 minutes, moderated by Kristen Welker from NBC. Now, after the last debate was blasted for being nothing short of a disaster, as there were constant interruptions and sniping, but no real substance, debate organisers are going to give candidates 2 minutes of uninterrupted time to address each of the 6 major agendas, which are fighting COVID-19, American families, race in America, national security, leadership, and climate change. And there will be a mute button to ensure that the 2 candidates cannot speak out of turn. But will a mute button be able to silence President Donald Trump? And after being criticised for his performance at the previous debate, can he make up for this? Today, we're joined by 2 experts in the United States, Ron Nehring, former chairman of California's Republican Party and director of international training at the Leadership Institute, who served as national spokesman in the presidential campaign of Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz. We also connect with Henry Olsen, Washington Post columnist and senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, who authored The Working Class Republican, Ronald Reagan and the Return of Blue-Collar Conservatism. It's very good afternoon to you both in the States. And well, let's start with you, Mr. Nehring. Now, the main points of this debate is going to touch upon COVID-19, racial injustice and national security, as well as climate change among the 6 agendas. And that really leaves no room for President Trump to talk about his achievements in the Middle East or his plans for American businesses. So the Trump campaigners complained that the topics are unfair. I mean, do you think they have a point here? And if the president comes across as badly as he did last time, then would he actually be able to recover from it?
Well, that's a great question. I think that number one is that Donald Trump is going to talk about whatever he wants to talk about, regardless of what the question is. He's not going to focus on answering the question. He's going to respond to the question, which is an answer plus what he wants to get across. So I don't think the questions really matter in terms of what the president's point is going to get across. He and his team will determine a couple of points that they want to make sure that they get across. And regardless of the question, they're going to make those points. In terms of COVID-19, that is the number one issue facing Americans today. And of course, that should be discussed, as well as the economic recovery from the lockdowns and the impact of the pandemic are important as well. So I think this debate covers important topics to the American people. I'm not sure climate change is anywhere near the top of the agenda on the minds of Americans today, given the pandemic and the state of the economy. But I think that there is too much complaining about process here, and that is that the president's campaign needs to spend more time talking about the future and less time talking about process, like the debates and voting by mail and how people cast ballots and so on. The election has to be about the future, and that would actually work to the president's benefit. So I think his campaign team needs to get off process stories and focus on the future instead of talking about the election so much.
And what do you think about this, Mr. Olsen? And what do you think President Trump is going to stick to the topics? And also, we just had that the FDA approved Gilead Sciences antiviral drug remdesivir as treatment for the coronavirus. And also that Judge Amy Barrett's nomination for Supreme Court Justice will go to a Senate-wide vote. Will these factors, do you think it's going to give President Trump a boost there?
I think the president is going to talk about his achievements. I think he will use the topic to spur into things he wants to talk about. For example, on climate change, he will almost certainly immediately turn and then talk about how, in order to combat climate change, Joe Biden, the Democrats, want to cut back on fossil fuel production. They want to raise energy prices. They want to stop energy production in many places, and he will use it as a way to talk about what he wants to talk about. COVID-19, the same thing, is that under his leadership, he will argue the treatments have progressed dramatically quickly, that we're on the cusp, perhaps, of having a vaccine that will be available by the winter time. Even if it's not 100% foolproof, it will reduce lethality and reduce symptoms. And I think that President will turn to that, and things that are not formally addressed, he'll find a way to get in, as all presidential candidates are trained to do that.
And Mr. Olsen, now President Trump's mission would really be to give unsure voters a reason not to vote for Joe Biden. And do you think he'll be able to do this tonight? And well, there's been a lot of talk that he's going to probably go after Biden's son. Do you think that kind of strategy will be useful at all?
You know, we're at the point where most presidents are reelected as to whether or not people think that they have done a good enough job to be given another 4 years chance. The president should spend as much time talking about why he is better than talking about why Joe Biden is bad. Yes, I expect him to try and drive home the point that for various reasons, Joe Biden is too liberal, too untrustworthy, and I'm sure he will bring up the president, Joe Biden's troubled son Hunter, and argue even that there might be a hint of corruption involved. But if he's not talking about himself, if he's not building up himself and saying, look, I was dealt a very tough hand right this year, and look at what we've been able to accomplish, then I think how many points he scores against Biden won't really matter unless Biden screws up terribly.
Now, Ms. Naring, having been a strategist for the Republican Party, how would you be advising the president in both his posture and the key messages or pledges that he really needs to convey to the people of America, particularly about COVID-19 and racial injustice?
Yeah, so, very sincerely, I think that the president needs a dynamic moment and to change the trajectory of this race. If the election were held today, the president would lose. But the election is not held today, so he has time in order to change the trajectory of this election. And I think that that involves recognizing that some of the things that they've been doing so far involving Hunter Biden, Burisma, all these bizarre attacks, these messages only work for people who watch 10 hours a day of cable television. The president needs to focus on the future, putting the pandemic to rest, citing the progress that's been made on therapeutics and toward a vaccine, and to create an image in the minds of Americans as to what America will look like a year or two from now. That the pandemic is behind us, the economy is strong again, America's place in the world is strong and safe and secure, and we're past that. Unfortunately, I've seen none of that so far. Instead, we're going down these various cul-de-sacs and rabbit holes, talking about bizarre issues that absolutely no undecided voter is waiting to hear about. Nobody wants to hear about Hunter Biden. Nobody wants to hear about Burisma and all of this. He needs to focus on the issues that Americans are concerned about and to create that vision of what the future looks like with his leadership.
And Ms. Naring, now, of course, Joe Biden has been leading in the polls, and it does seem he has less to gain from having this debate than President Trump. But what are some weaknesses, some chinks in the armor for Biden's campaign that may serve as risk factors, things that he's managed to dodge so far in the debate?
Yeah, I think that there has been a drumbeat of pointing to Joe Biden as being too old or out of step in order to serve in this capacity. And I've actually been surprised how many gaffes he has made. This doesn't mean that the president's a perfect speaker. That's clear. However, there are many what we would call unforced errors, meaning times that he just says weird things or does weird things. And so any moment like that occurs during this debate, where he claims he's in the wrong place or he uses a wrong statistic or something like that, is going to be amplified by the entire conservative media and Fox News and Fox Business and so on. So he really needs to be sharp, make no mistakes. The imperative here is that Joe Biden has to get through this debate making no mistakes. The imperative for the president is he has to get through this debate with a performance that changes the direction and the trajectory of the election. So there is a higher burden on the president as he goes into this debate.
Mr. Olson, some polls still show that most voters, they still trust the president more on the economy than Joe Biden. Will the economy continue to be a convincing reason to vote for Trump in states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan?
Well, what Trump has to do is marry success against COVID to success on the economy in a way that he has yet to do. People are concerned about both. They would like somebody who they can trust to control the disease and can trust to get them back to normal. And the president needs to be able to show that they can trust him on both counts. The fact is, I think he should raise doubts about Biden's economic plan and just ask the question, can you trust the country's economic recovery to Joe Biden and the Democrats over the next 2 years? Or do you feel comfortable with that with the Republicans. And he needs to have some short, specific points he wants to make. And he tends to make too many attacks. He needs to limit them so that they become a repetitious theme that people remember after this debate.
Mr. Naring, Donald Trump seems to be losing support in suburban areas as well. I mean, where he really built up support last time round, and he's asked for the love of suburban women and workers in the Rust Belt states. Which demographics will he have to work on to make sure that he wins over those swing states, and also which demographics will Joe Biden have to win over as well in that regard?
So I think so far the president's strategy and Joe Biden's strategy have been very different. Joe Biden's strategy is to win a majority by winning over swing voters, voters who don't make up their mind until very late, and so on. That's a traditional strategy to go after the center or to go after the ambivalent voters. Donald Trump's strategy is to activate people who are traditionally not voters, people who support him but are traditionally, they feel disenfranchised, they feel disconnected from the political process, and to get those people to register to vote and to turn out. Now, we've been watching those two strategies competing against one another, and so far Joe Biden's strategy is winning. So the president does need to win over some constituencies that traditionally are needed in order for a Republican win. Why is the state of Atlanta, for the state of Georgia, for example, as close as it is? It's because of the Atlanta suburbs. Georgia might be a southern state, which has a large rural population, but Atlanta and its suburbs are a major driver in the state's politics. And so I think what the president needs to do is to connect with those constituencies, to show that 4 more years under his leadership would produce improvements in their quality of life, would get us back past this pandemic, kids back in school, economy back open, and so on. There are no more rural, non-coastal, Trump supporters left that will give him a majority. And so they need to think majority and peel off some of those people who maybe have some concerns about the Green New Deal, about Bernie Sanders' role in the Democratic Party, and so on. And I think that's a direction that they need to go in order to win a majority. You cannot win in a democracy without winning a majority or at least a plurality. And so this requires, again, that change in the trajectory over the next 2 weeks.
And Mr. Olson, it seems that the Democrats have the advantage when it comes to the number of registered voters, especially in the swing states. Do you think the Republicans do have a chance of really flipping that over?
I think there is a lot of evidence that Republicans have expanded the voter pool over the last couple of months with their registration efforts, but it's not enough. He needs to both activate these new voters that they've been registering and do what Ron said, bringing over some of the people who voted for him 4 years ago, aren't fully Democrats, but maybe are hanging off the president right now. 4 years ago, the people who gave him the presidency were suburban, college-educated men who liked Republicans on issues and didn't think Trump was fit for office. In 2018, those people swung strongly to the Democrats, joining their suburban female brethren who had gotten them there before them 2 years earlier. You can talk all you want about suburban women. Donald Trump is not going to get those in the last 12 days. What he needs to do is reactivate the people who voted for him 4 years ago in the suburbs and say, give me another chance because this guy is just too scary and I'm good enough that you should be willing to give me another opportunity.
Now, I'd like to hear from both of you on this before we go, but the FBI says Iran has been sending threatening emails to Democrat voters, and Russia has also had access to voter data. So are you concerned about this? Let's start with you, Mr. Naring. How do you think these two countries are trying to influence the election?
I think the objectives of Iran, China, and Russia are different. Russia's intent is to erode Americans' confidence in our institutions, including our democratic system, the Center for Disease Control, and democracy itself. You can expect that if they have the opportunity, they will do things on election day and immediately following the election to say things like the outcome was rigged, there's all this mass voter fraud, and so on. Russia's objective is to undermine faith in democracy. China's objective tends to be different. Iran's objective tends to be different. The Iranians are the worst at this. They're dabbling in it, but they're not as good at it as the Russians are, and the Chinese are getting better, shall we say. The important point for Americans to understand is that there are foreign actors who are trying to interfere with America's democratic process to undermine faith in our democracy, and it's more of that erosion of confidence in the system. It's more of that than trying to elect one candidate or another, and that's been a big misunderstanding on the part of a lot of people who casually watch this. So, the best thing that everyone can do is to be a little bit more skeptical about what we see on social media, because information warfare taps into and hacks into our biases. So if something looks too good to be true, too sensational to be true, we have to be more concerned about that. The final point is that social media has allowed information warfare to be much more effective and to reach much more people, because the traditional gatekeepers have been removed, and now these foreign entities can directly communicate with the American people and cause more mischief that way.
And your thoughts on this, Mr. Olson?
I tend to downplay the actual effect these messages or other messages will have. The fact is, Americans are saturated with information about politics and about the presidential race. This isn't some small office somewhere where if they get an email, it's the only thing they know about. People have very firm opinions about President Trump and very clear opinions about Joe Biden. I don't think there's anything that the Russians or the Iranians or the Chinese can do to swing maybe even a tiny amount of votes, much less a significant number. I think Ron's right that it's really a question about sowing doubt with the systems and with the institutions more than anything else, than actually having a serious effect on the election.
I see. Well, the debate is set to start in a couple of hours, but hopefully we will see more clarity from the two candidates, perhaps not, but we'll leave that for our next discussion. But this is where we wrap up today. That was Ron Nehring, former chairman of California's Republican Party and the director of international training at the Leadership Institute, and also Henry Olson, Washington Post columnist and senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Thank you both so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, thank you for watching. We'll be back after the weekend here in South Korea. Have a great one wherever you are. Goodbye.